Welcome to today's HFS videocast on the future of supply chain. My name is Saurabh. I'm the president for research and advisory at HFS, and I'm delighted to be joined by three gentlemen today. Dharmendra Patwardhan, lovingly known as Pat, from Capgemini. He's the EVP and global head for intelligent supply chain at Capgemini. Kevin Nash, who's the SVP for Global Integrated Logistics at Kuehne Nagel, and then Matthew Spoomer, who's the head of industry thought leadership at Kinaxis. So welcome all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Saurabh.
Thanks.
And it's a pleasure for all of us to be with you. And I think a good starting point would be why are there three of us here for this minutes Capgemini? And the reason for that is that it goes into something which I think we'll explore as we go along in our conversation, which is that we believe that supply chains are more supply chain networks rather than supply chains, and networks imply ecosystems. And both Kuehne Nagel and Kinaxis are a part of the Capgemini ecosystem. And I thought that it would be interesting to turn this conversation into reality by having a triumvirate of the ecosystem to talk to you and exchange notes rather than just me, trying to articulate the point. So that's why we invited Kevin, and they graciously agreed. Kevin and Matt.
No, thanks, Pat. And I think the one keyword that I'll pick up from that opening remarks is supply networks, not supply chains, right? And I think if you look at what's happened over the last 2 or 3 years, COVID, actually, I think it's shone a light on all the supply chain issues that we've had. It was just not at the boardroom level, right? It was always dealt at an operational level. And then with the inflationary pressures, with the war that's happening in Ukraine, these challenges have been exacerbated. But I think I tend to think of myself as a glass half full kind of a person, and I feel this is a brilliant opportunity for all of us, but supply chain executives across the globe, to really deal with some of these issues head on, now more than ever. And in fact, we reached out to about 600 Global 2000 companies just recently, and nearly 80% of them said that they're looking at increasing investments in partnerships with third-party service providers and third-party technology providers, which brings to bear this whole concept of the ecosystem that Pat, you were just outlining, right? And I think I'd like to sort of start the conversation by just talking about this fact that supply chain is no longer an operational conversation; it's a boardroom conversation. It's a C-level conversation, and I feel that the mindset needs to change, right? Just the word chain itself sort of starts to connotate, linear, constrained thinking, and I feel, does the mindset of this have to change? What do you think, Pat? And then maybe we'll start with you, and then get on to Kevin and Matt.
Sure. So there were two questions you put together, Saurabh. So first is, so traditionally supply chain was, if I say so, taken for granted a little bit, and it was at least not a board level conversation. And there are, if you look at it with what has happened in the recent past, there are 3 or 4 forces which are now impacting the supply value network. Let me start by stopping using the word supply chain and start moving to supply value networks. And in no order of priority, sustainability, customer experience, and the global nature of supply chains, and the fact that often there are thousands of components in that global nature of supply chain. And last but not the least, resilience. And if you look at it, each of these, if we keep sustainability aside, has been either amplified or accelerated by what has happened because of the pandemic or because of the geopolitical events we have seen recently. And I think that has resulted in these four drivers, which have been impacting the supply value network, have elevated the importance of managing this to a board level conversation rather than something which you take for granted. And then if I come to this whole network aspect, and if I take the CPG industry as an example, and it's not unique, the concept of supply chain denotes that you have a big manufacturer, and then at the end of the day, how fast can you get material on shelves, was what it was all about. And while you said that it was customer centric, nobody in this chain, so-called chain, actually was very much concerned about the customer. Conversely, a network denotes that you have a customer at the heart, and then each of the constituent players, some of which can be the client, and a lot of them can be actually unique service providers who are uniquely positioned to add value, who come together to service the customer and what the customer wants, is where I come in, and Capgemini believes that is the point of view. And Kevin, would you want to give your views, followed by Matt, in terms of the questions which Saurabh had?
Matt, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of things that I want to add. The first thing is actually to consider the circularity of supply chain networks. So in the past, a supply chain was linear, but now in order to ensure sustainability, we've got to consider repair, reuse, and recycling of parts. And so supply chain is no longer a fixed linear process. It needs to be an end-to-end circular process. And the other piece, which I think is really important, is about about how supply chains have been elevated to the board. And you mentioned that the pandemic has elevated the importance of supply chain to the board. The recent supply shortages have elevated supply chain to the board. And I think what you're seeing coming up now is inflation. Inflation is going to be a board level topic, and it's a supply chain topic. So I think that we're going to see, this is not just a one-off event that supply chain has now become a board level conversation. Supply chain is a board level conversation.
I think to the point of the boardroom discussion, at least, I think that's never been more true. The significance of supply chain for companies is now undeniable, as you both mentioned. And if I look at it in the perspective of all the stakeholders that are in the chain, each of them represented by different board members, and that's why it's a collective board discussion and not just a single person within a board, right? So if you look at all those stakeholders that are either involved with or contribute within the order to cash cycle of a what we had previously determined as a linear supply chain, that's why it really is then becoming that network. And it is critical that a company's leadership do put supply chain on the agenda, because if they don't, they miss something very significant. So when Pat and Matt, you talk about supply chain being a network, or even let's say cyclical, this is also very true, right? If you consider all those different stakeholders that I mentioned being part of a network, right, and not just a component, but actually these stakeholders, all of them either consuming or providing information to complete their tasks. And it can be from sales and marketing, or who obviously want uninterrupted supply and availability, through customer service, to even quality and compliance. Don't forget finance and procurement. Then manufacturing, who must, for instance, plan, forecast, ensure capacity, accelerate or decelerate, depending on the demand at the time. And then you add in all the suppliers and service providers that are engaged in that supply chain network. All these are levers and influences on that supply structure. And that's why it's a boardroom discussion, and that's why it's a network and not a chain.
Yeah, so I think all of us agree that it's a boardroom discussion, and will continue to be that way. All of us agree that it's no longer a linear process, but it's circular, it's more networked. But I think the obvious follow-up question to that is, what is being discussed in these boardrooms? What are the inefficiencies? What are the problem statements? What are the pain points? that are being discussed. What are the top one or two that maybe, Pat, you can start us off again? What are the top two issues that you're observing in your clients, as an example?
So a lot of these factors are to a certain extent outside of an entity's control. So the global pandemic or the geopolitical shocks are something which you cannot directly control or influence. What you can control is agility. And it goes back to the point I was making earlier about linear versus network. So the principal point which a lot of organizations now are starting to address is agility. And this moves from a very tactical point that your planning horizons were monthly to the fact that you need to react far more quicker. And agility can only be achieved via visibility and the ability to act, because agility by definition means that you should be able to act at quick notice and react to changes which have happened. And how do you adjust this whole thing? And to be able to do that, availability of data, visibility to what is happening across your supply network, and then how do you react to it? I would rate these two or three things as the principal challenges which a lot of organizations are working towards figuring out how they need to solve. Matt, you want to take a stab at giving your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. But when we talk about agility, agility is not just making faster decisions around a bad process. It's not just speeding up a bad process. And I think there's a lot of organizations who think that agility is just making fast decisions, when actually it's the process that needs to be fundamentally addressed. Organizations, it's not just about putting in new technology. Organizations need to consider what is the planning technique, and John Sicard, the CEO of Kinaxis, talks about it's the technique, not the technology. And I think that's really important. The organizations, actually, one of the biggest challenges is that they need to look at the planning techniques and the supply chain techniques they use, not necessarily the technology that they use.
Yeah. When we in our role, Kuehne Nagel, as a let's say a supply chain orchestrator, when we're talking to our customers and the feedback we get from them, the two most common discussed inefficiencies are data and change management, and the conversations start from various different dynamics, right? In respect to the data itself, most companies have enormous amounts of data. We all have enormous amounts of data, and the clients we talk to have huge amounts of data. So it can be customer data, it can be logistics data, it can be external data. And getting data is typically not the issue. What we see is that the challenge starts when you want to make sense of data, and the challenge is exponentially increases when you actually want to take action on that data, right? To your point, what is the technique and not the technology, Matt, right? These steps have to be done really quickly and efficiently, because the value of data diminishes over time, right? So our focus, when we're talking to our customers, our focus as a supply chain orchestrator is to help our customers move towards real-time problem solving using better techniques. Obviously, technology comes to bear in that as well, but it's about how you use it and not necessarily just plugging something in, right? That real-time component is where the data in the supply chain is actionable and intervention can be preventative. The further you move away from that, any intervention becomes, let's say, corrective or educative only, right? And then the second thing, we talk about change management or lack of it, and that's where we see most of the projects or improvements that boards want to happen top down. That's where they mostly fail. Being crystal clear on the deliverable and who is actually responsible for the change and the subsequent activity, and then clearly communicating the plan. This is absolutely the critical component to success, or if not done, failure indeed, right? So What we advocate is that each department and function that will touch or engage with the planned change or improvement must be prepared to contribute and adapt. And we understand, of course, that this isn't easy, right? It's easy to say or it's simple to say, but not simplistic to deliver, right? So keeping that cross-functional alignment of all the multiple departments is a key challenge, and due to all the amount of information we talked about, right? Information that has to be processed between all the parties. And I think also something in that network is that there's numerous supply chain trade-offs that are always existing in most organizations. These are the two biggest areas of inefficiencies that we try to work on with our clients and in our role.
I know that's fascinating. So if I look at what all three of you said, right, I'm sort of reminded by this very simplistic framework that I was taught in high school. Remember the people, process, technology? Sort of, it was like a Venn diagram which intersected with each other. And what I remember was that all three circles were equal, right? Yeah. And I think what has happened over the last, decade, perhaps, in our obsession with digital, that technology circle has become very, very big. And we've somewhat forgotten a little bit about the talent equation. We've somewhat, not focused on the technique or the process element of it. And then I think in the modern world, we need to start adding to that framework, that layer of data, Kevin, that you mentioned, and change management. I think that holistic framework is what's missing. In if I look at the supply chain inefficiencies today, is how do you balance all those things? It's easier said than done. But Pat, you at Capgemini are trying to do that, right? What is your magic mantra for clients to address some of these challenges around agility and bring together all these levers of people, process, technology, data, change in a holistic way to really make a dent in some of these conversations?
Sure. And before I answer that, Saurabh, just to amplify the points which you made and Kevin made, Matt made, why is it that Excel continues to be the most commonly used technology across all of supply chain? And the principal reason for that is the point which everybody made, which is that organizational change management, the people aspect of it, the fact that in theory, the technology element of the Venn diagram consumed a lot of it, and reduced focus on the other two, which is the people and the change management side of it. And that's where we come in, actually, because one, it's easier to do change when you're able to centralize and do it with somebody like Capgemini, whose bread and butter is to operate processes in a standard manner, etc., etc. Second, from our consulting practice, we come with a strong organizational change management practice. And typically, as a part of any large technology implementation, we almost insist that this be an integral part of what a client should embark upon. Whether we do it, somebody else does it, is not the key criteria. And third, then, if I look at how do we address it structurally. Now, if we look at the way organizations have been structured, and this is true for most companies, even within an organization, there are silos. So if you take the multiple organizations, so if you take planning, sits within supply chain, and typically the planning function will be, for even best-in-class companies, be geared towards optimizing their own KPIs. Manufacturing will be optimized for manufacturing typically in the past with long production lines at the cheapest cost. So the key point I'm making is that between plan, execute, which is the commercial function, moving on to deliver, which is the whole logistics and fulfillment part, and then you move on to the collect and claims portion, which is where you finally, after delivering, collect cash. Each of these is geared towards optimizing themselves. and which is where the Capgemini concept of one operations kicks in, that move away from this traditional siloed concept of optimizing for your vertical and run it as a value chain, where you look at it from plan to collect and then run it as a value chain. And I'm using the value chain here because right now I'm focused on, first of all, solving problems which exist within the enterprise. And then, of course, there need to be significant ecosystem partners in this whole thing to make it work. So one operations is about breaking silos, running operations as a value stream rather than as the verticals in which typically organizations are organized. Wonderful. And then bringing in the right suite of ecosystem to bear, both from a technology perspective and from a people and organizational change management. And we've seen that a number of large organizations are increasingly seeing the value of working in a different manner. It's a large change for most organizations, but that is the way forward. And that's what we are recommending to our clients is one of the solution aspects of what we just discussed in terms of the challenges we see and how do we turn them into opportunities.
Yeah, so you're, sorry, Matt, go on.
And I was just going to reinforce what you were just saying, Pat. Because I worked for most recently with a very large organization who is moving to away from siloed function organization to end-to-end processes, looking at plan to deliver, order to cash, procure to pay across the whole finance supply chain. And I think it is a huge change for the organization. But it's a change that drives huge improvements in efficiency, not just in terms of supply chain efficiency. It drives huge improvements in terms of the overall results of the organization and the customer centricity of the organization.
Very true, very true. Because one of the important aspects of the one operations premise is that actually the business outcomes which you typically measure in terms of working capital, revenue, profitability are subservient to a larger objective of how do you improve employee experience? How do you improve your customer experience, for instance? And if you do that, then these business objectives which you track through numbers are derivatives of that rather than being sitting on top of the fundamental objectives of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, my experience is with our clients, we're in a relationship a sector, especially in the supply chain segment, as it's been called. We'd love to call it supply network segment, but we're not there yet. But ultimately, it's the people behind, and moreover, lately the people agenda has been very, very challenging, and I think the pandemic has really thrown our older traditional thinking on its head. People have been investing, and companies have been investing in real estate and many things for many years. Whereas now it's the employee experience that matters much more than the let's say corporate footprint. It's the corporate identity now, and we do that through our people and through delivering customer satisfaction. And that comes, and we see it, and there have been studies very clearly done on the fact that higher customer satisfaction scores in terms of, whether it's net promoter scores or however you want to manage that, come from engaging with the customer end to end and managing all those different stakeholders in that network. So the people agenda is absolutely critical. And a lot of, in the past, I heard many people talking about the soft skills, right? I don't look at it as soft skills at all, right? If you talk about people who don't want to work in your organization anymore and their lack of or diminished productivity prior to their leave, then there's a period of time where you have to drive a period within your network of excessive effort from the people who remain. Then you have new people coming in, hopefully as in the most agile way as possible. And then those people take a period of time to get up to speed. There's a very, very solid mathematical calculation behind that tells you that the money behind that process is not soft at all, right? It's a very, very solid bottom line impact, and therefore a boardroom discussion about how you need to manage your people responsibilities alongside all the other responsibilities you have to your clients.
Mm-hmm. And Saurabh, if I might put a question to you for a change. I think that the one office concept, which HFS has been, at the heart of putting forth, and one operations, in some sense, at a construct level, are aiming towards the same goal. Do you think that hypothesis is valid? What's your point of view?
No, absolutely, Pat. In fact, I was going to say exactly the same. Your one operations sounds very similar to our one office, with just semantics are different, right? Because I think I truly believe that, this whole digital narrative that we've been going after is now Horizon 1. Digital is no longer some sci-fi that's going to happen in 3-5 years. Digital is required right now, right here. It's essential for survival. But I think in this whole, obsession with digital, we've forgotten a little bit about holistic transformation, right? And we talked about people, process, data, change. Technology is very, very important. So don't get me wrong, but technology alone is not going to help us solve that problem. And that's really the fundamental premise between this one office, wherein, where we're looking at holistic transformation. If you look at organizations, they've been so fragmented with this, there's a front office, there's a middle office, there's a back office. And to be honest, supply chains are one of the most fragmented operations that are out there. There are at least 20 supply chain teams, and that's why the easiest way to share information is spreadsheets. And that's really the concept behind one office, that there's only one office that matters, and that's the office that caters to the customer, right? And all these enabling technologies need to just facilitate that one office, right? And if you are able to deliver that through the one operations concept, Pat, leveraging ecosystem partners, because I don't think, however big Capgemini might be, you can't be everything to anyone, right? You will need.
We don't intend to be, sir. We don't intend to be, because that is not the right thing. Because, for example, what Kevin does is something which is unique and a specialized capability, and Kinaxis, for example, and that was one of the reasons, as I mentioned at the beginning, that we thought it would be interesting to get together folks who bring unique capabilities to the table and form a part of our wider ecosystem.
Yeah, I think where we are going in this world is, there are 3 stakeholders that we have to manage and give equal importance. There is the customer. We need to manage customer experience, but there is, as Kevin, you mentioned, we need to equally manage the employee experience, because you can't get to the customer experience without employee experience. But the one thing that we often forget is the partner experience, because I think that's becoming, especially if you're a supply chain convert, then you need to look at that partner experience as well. But, I think this was a very fascinating conversation. I just have one last question for all 3 of you. And it is, if you had one wish that could come true in your world, given all the stuff that's going around us, what would that be? I'll start with you, Matt. If you had one wish that could come true, what would that be?
That's I mean, I assume you're talking about just within the context of supply chain as opposed to the wider wish for the world. But I think if I had one wish, it would be that we would all collaborate in an open and transparent way, and that we would focus on, very much on sustainability, and ensuring the long-term survival of, of the planet and the resources that we have, because I think that's in the long-term best interest of all of our organizations and us as a species.
Collaboration, collaboration to drive sustainability. That's a noble thought. Kevin?
Yeah, it's gonna sound a bit trite, but it would have been exactly, if you say I have that one wish, right? So in supply chain, yeah, I think the sustainability topic is super high on the agenda, right? And you talked about earlier about what is that don't forget the partner management, right? In that collaboration, right? So there's the customer piece, there's the employee piece, right? So, and I think when I look at all those conversations, that one wish is getting spread out, and our customers, I think, across everywhere are the world over, and this is coming through in all the supply chain conversations that we have, and that's that sustainability topic, like Matt says, right? And so my wish is that we can expand that collaboration. I mean, one good news is that and that's how we're engaged with Capgemini as Kuehne Nagel, right? Is to offer really holistic sustainability programs that really cover everything from strategy creation to execution, and the execution being that you can really follow it through, and you can measure it, and you can work on reduction, and therefore you can really support all those supply chain guys sitting in the boardrooms to deliver their needs, right? So if it's one wish in the context of this conversation, it's to really deepen the collaboration with all the different parties in the chain. We even have some customers who have really flipped everything over, and they said, we're not going to plan anything now that can have a lower footprint. We're going to plan the lowest footprint and then manage the consequences of that planning differently. Right, so it's they put their focus on managing costs to the lowest footprint, right? And it's a complete 180 degrees thinking. And my one wish would that more and more and more companies would think in that direction and put sustainability first.
Sustainability first through collaboration.
Yeah.
Pat?
So on a lighter note, I think in my professional lifetime, I wish that Excel stops being the primary tool of supply chain experts, proponents. But on a more serious note, couldn't agree more with the themes which Matt and Kevin highlighted. And from a Capgemini perspective, we've actually made it a public statement that we put a target out there that by a given period in time, we will save for our clients a huge number of $1 billion in terms of CO2 emissions saved. And so from our perspective, it's something which is akin to a company, and that represents the seriousness with which we believe that not just Capgemini, but everybody in this world needs to tackle this whole aspect of sustainability at a structural level. And supply chain is at the heart of being able to contribute, because it is also at the heart of the negative aspects of what we have seen in terms of the impact on the environment and so on and so forth. So I think you've got common agreement from everybody that if we had to pick one, this seems to be at the top of everybody's agenda.
Yeah, well, if 3 people have the same wish, there's a higher chance of it coming true, right? So I think on that note, thank you, gentlemen. This has a fascinating conversation, and I think to people who are listening to this or watching this, I think the silver bullet is collaboration. If you want to get your internal teams working, collaborate with them. If you want to get broader supply chains or broader supply networks working, collaborate with the ecosystem. And if you want this world to be what we see it is, if you want this to be sustainable, then again, it's collaboration. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for being candid, and thanks for sharing your views.
Thank you, Saurabh.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. It's been a pleasure. and hope it was a good experience.
Guys, thanks everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Saurabh. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much,
Thanks.
everyone.